Hello and welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty online at foxnews.com/freedomwatch. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano here, defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. Why do we still have a drug war when people on all sides of the issue seem to acknowledge decades of failure in this struggle? And what would it take? How much police power would it take to achieve anything resembling a victory? The Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman once suggested that the drug war is as hopeless as all other attempts by the government to interfere with markets, such as prohibition or price controls. If the drug war is failing, it's not for a lack of assets. Approximately 500,000 Americans are incarcerated on drug charges, including about 1 in 8 African-American males in their 20s, which in turn breaks apart families, as health researcher Evan Wood notes. This perpetual crackdown occurs despite the fact that about half of Americans, say they've tried an illicit substance, suggesting that America may like drugs at least a little bit more than the federal government does. In recent years, the Drug Enforcement Administration has continued to raid marijuana sellers, even in states that have declared marijuana lawful for certain purposes. And the DEA continues using military-like tactics, even as President Obama says he wants a milder, more understanding approach to the drug war. Is this a quasi-military campaign that has taken on a life of its own, even when the rest of society is ready to declare a truce? Joining me now is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Jacob, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge. Nice to be back.
When you and I were younger, which wasn't that long ago, it seemed that the stoners and the druggies and the hippies were the only ones calling for the legalization of recreational drugs in private. But now it seems to be coming from all across the board. Libertarians like you and me, even some conservatives fed up with the cost of law enforcement, and certainly folks on the other side of the aisle as well. What has happened? What's different now? What, if anything, have people recognized about the right to use, or what should be the right to use, recreational drugs?
Well, I think we have 40 years of experience. 40 years ago, when President Nixon declared the war on drugs, the drug warriors could say, look, if you'll just give us a chance to initiate force, to exercise power, we can win this war on drugs. We can stamp out drugs from society. Now, 40 years later, they're still saying the same things, but people can look back and say this is ridiculous. Not only have you not accomplished your goal, you have made things significantly worse for the people of America and the people of the world, with the violence, the collateral damage, all the money that's being spent. So reality has mugged people in the face.
Is there something either nostalgic or Victorian about the American government, that it wants to pretend that people don't use drugs or shouldn't use drugs, whereas in reality, as I indicated in the opening, close to half of all Americans indicate, when they're telling the truth in private to pollsters, that they have tried a drug knowing at the time they tried it that it was unlawful? And if so, why do we still have this Victorian notion? Why do we pretend that something is when we know it's not?
I think it's about power and money, Judge, that this drug war is providing a lot of power for a lot of public officials and a lot of money. I mean, people don't like to talk about corruption except with respect to Mexico and Latin America and so forth. But let's face it, there's judges on the take, there's cops on the take, there's people that are getting paid off at the borders to let drug dealers through. I mean, this drug war is insidious in what it does to your public administration system. And so they maintain this notion of, oh, we just think it's wrong for people to take drugs. But I think it goes much deeper than that.
If the federal government is going to say to the states, under some circumstances, you can't stop a woman from taking a baby out of her womb and letting the doctor kill the woman, how is the same government going to say you can't put a chemical into your body, a chemical you have chosen, under a circumstance where it won't harm your body and it won't harm anybody else? How can we possibly have a dual set of laws that stand for the opposite?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is the moral case for freedom. How can you truly claim to be living in a free country when your own government can jail you for ingesting something that it doesn't approve of in the privacy of your own home? That simply cannot be called a free country. I mean, it boggles my mind that the likes of Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Dick Cheney claim the authority to put me in jail because I'm doing something that's harmful or dangerous or whatever. It just boggles my mind that they claim that moral authority. It's inconsistent with the fundamental principles of freedom.
I have to confess to you that, of course, in my prior life, I did put people in jail for this, an attitude that I would have differently today. Of course, I took an oath to uphold the laws of the state of New Jersey, which at the time were consistent with federal laws. But a state like New Jersey has now changed its law, and with a physician's prescription for medical marijuana, much like in California, you can grow the marijuana, you can use the marijuana as long as it's under the supervision of a physician. Question, will the federal government looking the other way, which it has announced it will, begin sort of a drumbeat, a march toward, well, this really isn't as harmful as the feds have thought? Maybe they should not only look the other way, maybe they should change their regulations and let the states decide this, or better yet, let individuals decide for themselves what they want to do to their bodies.
Well, that's the ultimate solution, because if the federal government starts looking at the other way, people get a disrespect for law in general. They see that some people are being prosecuted, others are not. Some people are being allowed to go free and others not. This is not the way the law is supposed to be administered, as you well know. The ideal is just ditch this war. As you pointed out in your opening segment, it's a racist war. It falls disproportionately on African Americans. It takes African American fathers out of the family, leading their kids into a life of crime, deprives them of the right to vote. I mean, this thing's gone on for 40 years. How much more time do we have to let these people do their thing in this thing when it's causing so much damage and destruction? You
know, conservatives have sometimes forcefully defended property rights, but don't they recognize that we own our own bodies? I mean, I don't even think I own my backyard because the government makes me pay so much money just for owning the backyard. But I clearly own my own body, and if I do own my own body, who is the government to interfere and tell me what I can do with that body as long as the doing of it doesn't harm somebody else? Isn't that a basic argument that should appeal across the board, no matter what someone's political views or ideological views are?
Absolutely, the principles of freedom, but you've also got strong family values that conservatives have traditionally stood for. Fiscal responsibility. Here's a way you can save the federal and state and local governments millions of dollars. I mean, these are the values that conservatives hold dear. Low crime rates. You could eliminate all the drug cartels, all the drug gangs, the burglaries, the robberies that people go through to pay the exorbitant black market prices for these drugs. All that evaporates immediately on drug legalization. These are the values that conservatives have always stood for.
Jacob Hornberger, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.